It's been 2 weeks since Barcelona and the Formula One cars were finally back on track in Bahrain for the final testing before the start of the 2022 season. And today I'm going to go over everything you need to know from those 3 days worth of testing, because there was lots of stuff happening on track. And obviously in just a week's time, we will know who is going to win the first race of the 2022 season. So let's delve into it and start at day 1. Just a few little caveats. I will show the times and tyres and laps from each team. Obviously, the days themselves were broken into a morning and an afternoon session. I've just combined them for the sake of ease for me, basically. And also, I have shown the tyres there because the teams were available to use all 5 different compounds of tyre, from C5 being the softest compound of tyre to C1 being the hardest compound of tyre. But as you can see from day 1, there was a lot of fluctuation and lots of different track time limits for various different drivers. Lots of teams deciding to split this day into 2 sessions for their 2 separate drivers, and that's where you get like the 52 laps from Sainz compared to the 103 from Gasly. It's because Gasly did both the morning and the afternoon. But in terms of what we were looking for from day 1, all eyes were on those big teams at the top. It was Mercedes, Red Bull and Ferrari, and which of those 3 after Barcelona was going to come out swinging. And actually, it was Mercedes who made the headlines on the first day. They came into the season with a side podless car, a very, very striking transition to what we've seen from any of the other teams on the grid so far. And actually, Mercedes' smooth transition into this side podless car kind of caught the eye of lots of different teams up and down the grid. Even Ross Brawn said that it was something he was not expecting from these 2022 regulations. And obviously Formula One went through lots and lots of testing when they were coming up with these regulations, and this is something that they did not see. But actually the aerodynamics and the side pod design, although striking, didn't look like it was really working for Mercedes a lot of the day. They had a lot of trouble with the porpoising, which many teams also had too. And I think this is something that we're going to see over the first couple of races, really, because lots of teams, even into the final days of testing, were struggling with this bouncing. It was slightly better than Barcelona, but still, I think this ground effect, the fact that the ground effect is coming in and the slight change to the rear end of the car as well for this season, I think lots of teams are struggling to adapt to that. And lots of teams even said that they made rookie errors coming into the season when they were trying to test, obviously, computer generatively what was going to happen to these cars, and the fact that in reality it's something completely different. Aston Martin looked the trickiest of the cars to drive though, and Sebastian Vettel and Lance Stroll really struggling on the first day to get any sort of purchase. Lots of times going off the track, lots of times missing apexes of corners, and the aero rake on Stroll's car even fell off at one point, causing a red flag for the session. So Aston Martin looked like the team probably most behind everybody else when it came to setting up their car and getting that stability for their team. McLaren, though, also had massive struggles in the first day. They had braking issues and also illness to Dani Ricciardo, which was then confirmed to be COVID-19. So Daniel Ricciardo ended up missing all of the testing over the course of Bahrain. He will retest on Friday before the Bahrain Grand Prix weekend, and if he's positive again for COVID-19, will not be able to take part in the first race of the season. So really big issues for McLaren on the first day, and lots of things that they had to try and sort out and get right. And Haas also had their issues on the first day, running a little bit late basically. There were some freight issues in the UK, getting car parts and different pieces of equipment over to Bahrain, and basically they missed a couple of the deadlines and couldn't arrive on time for the first day of testing. Now, granted, they did get some extra time on days 2 and 3, which we'll talk about in a little while, due to those different circumstances. There were a couple of teams that were very opposed to Haas actually getting the extra time that they needed, but overall they were granted that. And then Mick and Kevin putting in some work, some great drives, and Fittipaldi even coming in on the first day of testing for Haas as well. It looked positive. It looked like a real change at Haas, considering, 2 weeks ago in Barcelona, it was all doom and gloom. It looked like they'd maybe, found a little glimmer of hope in the team. The team looked rejuvenated, revitalized, and ready to go for this season, even if things do just keep going wrong for them. We then jumped into day 2. As you can see, a few changes there, and Kevin Magnussen actually jumping to the top of the rankings. But Day 2 saw some crazy weather conditions in Bahrain. It was insanely hot, and actually lots of teams and drivers were struggling with the conditions, mainly due to the wind on the track and the dust on the track as well. And considering that lots of drivers and teams were bringing new aero packages into the weekend, I think the massive changing in wind conditions and the direction of the wind did not help the teams at all on this second day of testing. So that would have been a little bit of a hindrance for everyone up and down the grid, especially Mercedes and Red Bull, I think. Mercedes and Red Bull, obviously, they being the top two teams over the last 2 seasons, have had the least time in the air tunnel, and therefore have had less time than everybody else to develop these aero parts on the car. Red Bull were bringing massive changes to their car on day 2, and they actually left a couple of those changes until day 3 in the end, maybe due to those wind conditions. And Mercedes were trying to make changes to that overall dynamic that they've got going on. Obviously, they kept with the sort of side podless design that they've got, but their floor looked very, very basic. And it seems like those two teams might take a little while to adjust to the new regulations. But it is Mercedes, it is Red Bull. At the same time, I'm kind of expecting them to come out next time and bounce back and be perfect. McLaren, though, again, day 2 was a real struggle for them. And you know, Barcelona went incredibly smoothly for a lot of the teams, and most teams were able to get their reliability issues out of the way on that final day in Barcelona. But then they started to creep in again in this second day in Bahrain. And McLaren pull up to the end of the pit lane, and Norris even had to push his car back after the brakes were overheating. And you know, it's one of those things with McLaren. They looked so good in the Barcelona testing, really, and it's come to 2 weeks later, and lots of teams have made steps forward. And I think maybe McLaren have kind of stood still in a slight way. They had lots and lots of issues over the course of the weekend as a whole, and day 2 kind of culminated in that. They lost so much running time because Daniel Ricciardo wasn't there, and Lando Norris had those brake issues in the morning, and then because they ended up having no Daniel Ricciardo, they kind of had to think about how much they could push Norris to his limits. Norris ended up not doing too many laps on that second day, I think maybe to try and hold back and keep himself fresh for the third day of testing. The fact they had no third driver was a big, big worry for me. In the end, they actually got offered Piastri in a striking deal with Alpine, where Alpine have said if Daniel Ricciardo can't take part in the first race of the season, they'd be more than happy to offer Piastri. Obviously, we've got the likes of Di Resta being talked about, we've got De Vries being talked about. There's lots and lots of different drivers that could take the place of Daniel Ricciardo. Hopefully Daniel Ricciardo is back, and if anything, they needed the driver this weekend rather than next weekend. And also a striking deal came out on the second day of testing in terms of McLaren, in that they've got a deal now with Hauger from IndyCar, and he's going to come and test the 2021 McLaren. So maybe a little bit of a link between McLaren and Andretti. Made a video a couple of days ago talking about Andretti and whether or not they will be coming into Formula One. I'll leave a link to the description down below to that, but I think it's interesting that McLaren are starting to make those links to Andretti, the team that might possibly come in. But overall, day 2 for McLaren was just an absolute throwaway. They couldn't really finish any of the tests that they wanted to do, and it was very, very tough for them. And then you can say the same for Williams, really. Williams had an awfully tough second day. Also overheating brakes for Latifi at the end, and actually causing the entire rear end of the car to catch fire. So lots and lots of work for the Williams guys to do to prepare the car for day 3, because as I said, the entire back end was effectively in flames, and it melted various parts of carbon fiber and also the suspension all the way through the back end as well. So lots and lots of change had to happen for Williams over the evening. Latifi had to evacuate the car fairly swiftly, and according to the team, this was just a slight issue that they could put wrong quite easily, but obviously the damage was done and then lots of repairs had to happen. And then obviously, as you saw at the beginning, Kevin Magnussen topping the times. Now, I do have to put a little caveat here. This was one of the sessions where Haas were able to have an extra hour at the end of the day because of the issues they had with getting there on time. So they were given an extra hour. Kevin Magnussen obviously was a cool track at the end of the day, incredibly rubbered in, and he's there all on his own. But still a big statement of intent for Haas to go out there and set the fastest lap of the day with Kevin Magnussen. I thought was very, very cool from Haas. The fact that they were like, you know what, we're given this opportunity to go around on our own. Let's see what we can properly do. Let's kick things into gear. And then we got into day 3. Lots of drivers taking part in the day 3 of testing, obviously because it's their final opportunity to get behind the car before the free practice sessions on Friday. And towards the end of this session, we actually saw lots of cars, as you can see at the top there, going for those C5s and C4s, putting the soft compound tyres on, gearing the car up for a qualifying session, and properly showing the pace of these cars. And Max Verstappen actually coming out on top in those soft tyre, low fuel load qualifying lap runs. Maybe puffing his chest out a little bit. The fact that he is the current world champion definitely was on his side. And the fact that Red Bull also brought those big upgrades I was talking about earlier on. They were finally clipped onto the car fully for that 3rd day of testing, and Sergio Perez really putting in the miles to test out those aero things, and they looked very stable and very capable. And I talked about lots of the teams struggling with porpoising over the course of the weekend. Red Bull, towards the end, they looked like they had it down, and I think Red Bull might be one of the first teams that has properly nailed these aero regulations in terms of getting the ground effect and the porpoising to kind of balance out with one another. But we'll have to wait and see whether that is the case. And of course, it's very impressive from Red Bull that they were running their brand new Red Bull power unit as well for this weekend. Alfa Romeo, just to quickly touch on them because we haven't really spoken about them much. A much better practice than in Barcelona, because in Barcelona, as Bottas said at the end of the weekend there, it was torrid for them. But actually getting quite a few laps in, Bottas looking like he will be the difference maker for that team, and looking like if, you know, he's delivered a good car and this Alfa Romeo does sit where I'm expecting it to, he could really push into that midfield battle. We also haven't talked about Alpine too much. We haven't talked about Alpine too much because they kind of came into the weekend and just went under the radar a little bit. They were very cool, calm and collected, very considered over the course of the weekend, got their testing done, and there wasn't really too big or too small a thing that happened. You know, probably Alonso getting the 4th quickest time on the 3rd day is the biggest sort of story point for Alpine, but they just kind of went about their business. They look fairly comfortable in what they're doing, and Alonso and Ocon look fairly settled. Similar for AlphaTauri, actually. I haven't mentioned AlphaTauri too much because, again, Pierre Gasly and Yuki Tsunoda looked fairly comfortable in the car, and they had 3 days of pretty consistent testing. Actually, Yuki Tsunoda looking a lot more comfortable. I know he looked very good in testing last year, and the Yuki hype train was sort of geared up for that first race of the season, but I think with a year under his belt, he looked even cooler, even calmer, and even more collected in that AlphaTauri car for the first race of the season. Ferrari, as you saw, I literally popped up, apologies about that, but Ferrari seemed to be the one team that has just put no feet wrong. Like Barcelona, they were the only team that really got everything done, you would imagine, and it had no real issues, and it was the same again in Bahrain. No issues over the course of the 3 days, just perfect running from them. Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc looking really happy and really settled inside that car, and I know it's cliche, I know everybody has been saying it, I know there's a lot of expectation on Ferrari for this new season, but they just look incredibly good. Carlos Sainz even put it himself, he said that the reliability has been the real cornerstone of this Ferrari. It's meant that they've been able to do all of the tests that they wanted to do, as well as some additional tests they weren't expecting to do as well. So Carlos Sainz looks fairly happy and sounds very happy with the team and the car that's in front of him. And it made me wonder, actually, and I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments down below about this. The fact that they came 6th in 2020, was that actually beneficial to them? Because, you know, Mercedes and Red Bull, they had to bring huge upgrades to their aero because of the lack of wind tunnel testing that they get because they were right at the top over the course of those 2 seasons. Ferrari, obviously coming 6th, did pick up themselves a little bit more wind tunnel testing time, and by no means am I saying that Ferrari obviously came 6th on purpose that season, but it maybe has helped them that little bit more than we were expecting because they've had that extra time to develop the aerodynamics of the car. And then just some overall stats for you from the 3 days overall. Lando Norris having to put in the most laps of any driver out there, again because Daniel Ricciardo was not available, but as you can even see, George Russell only 2 laps behind Lando Norris, so McLaren really struggling to get the laps in compared to the other teams available. The likes of Fittipaldi, Magnussen and Schumacher, obviously because they had to split the drive between 3, also at the bottom of the running. But you can just see that Albon and Williams and Latifi maybe missed out on a few laps just because of that fire that happened on day 2. But overall, most of the teams were able to put in a fairly consistent number of laps, with 6 teams doing over 300 laps. Alpine, Williams, Haas and McLaren, the only ones under 300, and McLaren actually the only team under 200 laps for the entire weekend. And whether that will cost them in the long run, we'll have to wait and see. But at the end of the day, it is just testing, and lots of things are going to happen over this week and over the first race weekend of the season. But I'm incredibly excited to see who is going to come out on top next Sunday. Of course, it will be live streamed on the channel with you guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. Leave a like, comment down below who you think is going to win the first race of the season and which team you think will be top of the constructors because of that. Thank you so much. I'll see you next time.